photography has always been in my bag of tricks. I love to get out in the wide open and just snap photos, if it's of wildlife, weather, someplace unknown, or getting into that no trespassing area just for a quick shot. Well, the latter is one I will never do again, even if I almost lost my life. It was a pleasant day in October and I had just got home from work. The air was still fresh with the smells of the outdoors. After I had freshened up, I decided to grab my camera and head out into the wilderness for some photography bliss. The day was light out and I didn't want to waste any of it. I got to the spot I wanted to start hiking at and made my way in, not knowing of the adventure I was about to really have. About 3 miles in, I came to a huge building, one I have never seen in this area, even though I've trekked this trail many times. Graffiti lined the exterior and interior. All the windows were smashed and an overwhelming sense of foreboding came over me. Well, this is new. I should take some shots since I've never come across this, I mumbled to myself. I walked the full grounds, finding anything of interest to take a photo of. This place was massive, a good 1,500 square feet. It had about 5 dilapidated buildings that were interesting to say the least. Taking a good careful look into all the buildings, I found one that was easy to access, the no trespassing sign staring me right in the face. What's there to fear in here? Well, here goes nothing. That would be the single most frightening thing I've ever done. Making my way through the crumbling hallways, snapping photos as I went. That feeling that you aren't alone really didn't hit me until I was well into the building. And it hit me hard. Every 5 minutes I kept looking over my shoulder, hoping to see someone there. I didn't, but when I stopped walking, it would sound like someone was walking up behind me, walking ever so softly, just rustling the paraphernalia on the floor. As I turned around, the noise stopped and I saw no one there. I shrugged it off and kept going, floor after floor, snapping pictures. It was getting dark out and I still had the basement to explore, somewhere you don't want to be at night in a dark and creepy building. I started to make my way down to the basement, the feeling of dread getting worse and more thick. As I got to the door, the air was cool, musky and damp. The door opened with a loud and thunderous wail, probably waking up every forest creature in a 2-mile radius. I walked in and looked around, taking photos every second I could. I noticed a few red stains on the floor and walls, but passed them up to being rust or just the color of the old paint that was peeling. I started to make my way out of the basement when I saw one door that I hadn't opened. I walked over and put my hand on the handle, a jolt of electricity coursing through me. I had that instant dread feeling again, but this time it was much thicker. I had to think of what to do if I were to run into someone with a dark intent. But knowing my luck, it wouldn't be that simple. I opened the door to a candle-lit room, the air filled with the smell of candles burning and incense. The air was thick, the air you could cut with a knife thick. Then I noticed him, a large, black mass in the corner, watching my every move. Then I noticed the stains all on the floor and the walls. They were covered in dripping red, and it made me shiver. I made a move to the door and it slowly closed, then slammed shut, sealing me in with the figure. I stayed near the door and waited to see what he would do. It wasn't long before he broke his gaze on me and started to move. He came closer, not super close but to a point where I could make out what he looked like. 7 feet tall, normal human head with ram's horns and dark, motionless eyes. I stood frozen to the spot. Then it spoke. Sanguis purpureus super paraidum at sica fergita at prompta est, the figure said, not breaking his gaze. I have no idea how to speak Latin, but he pulled a long knife-looking weapon, a good 10 to 12 in long, and pointed it toward me. The air was sucked out of my lungs and I couldn't breathe, looking at any opportunity to escape. He then made more strides toward me and I found the closest thing I could to me and threw it at him. It hit him right above the eye and he was dazed enough where I found the door and made a run for it. Running through that hallway was not easy. Everything that could go wrong did. Just then, the most bone-rattling, earth-shattering roar came from behind me as he was making his way through the hallway after me. I ran as fast as I could, hearing this beast not that far behind me. I found a small crawl space I was able to fit into to hide and wait. It was the middle of the night, so I would have to wait until daylight to make my move to get out of here and away from the nightmare in front of me. Morning came and I slowly peeked my head out of the crawl space, hoping to not see this thing waiting for me. I didn't see him, so I gathered myself and got out of that building as fast as I could, not looking back. I got to my car and drove the 30 minutes home, thinking of what may have led up to me getting into that predicament. I looked through all the pictures I took of this place and only one stood out to me. It was in that same building, not in the room I saw this beast, but it was in the most obvious place, right when I walked in, after ignoring the signs on the door. He was standing in the doorway, not 5 feet from me. He was fully in the picture, but my own eyes didn't see him. I will never go back into any abandoned place like that again, even if it's for the thrill of a photo. I was 16 when this story took place. I don't remember much now that I'm 25, but I do remember this day vividly. I was cleaning out my grandma's house a couple of days after she died. It was pretty normal until my brother, who was helping me clean the house up, went to get food for the both of us, leaving the house just for me. Now I wanted to finish the job today. After all, there were just a couple of rooms left, so I continued working. When I was about to finish the last room, I heard something in the upstairs hallway. I curiously looked up there before shrugging it off and continued working on the last couple of items in the drawer I was cleaning up. But the noise happened again, but this time louder. I sighed and put the framed photograph I found in the drawer down and started walking up the stairs to investigate what the noise was. When I fully got upstairs, I saw the attic stairs fully down. I looked it up and down before quickly concluding that the ladder hit the floor, and that is what was making the banging noise. I looked around upstairs a bit just to be safe and make sure there were no intruders before finally making my way up into the attic. The attic at first seemed like another regular attic, dusty, filled with boxes, and occasionally spiders. I searched around the attic a bit before deciding to open a box labeled Memories of Family and Friends. The first thing I saw in the box was a photo book filled with photos of my grandma and my grandpa, sometimes with friends or family. I went through that a little bit before stumbling upon an old Polaroid camera in the box. Under the camera was an old dusty Polaroid. I picked the Polaroid up and looked at the photo. It just seemed like any other regular photo with my grandpa and my grandma sitting on a couch together smiling. I smiled at it before realizing something was wrong. Behind the couch was a completely dark shadow of a person standing over my grandma with his hand on her head smiling. I looked at it for a couple of seconds, then out of nowhere the Polaroid camera went off. It was still in the box, so I freaked out and backed away from it. After a minute or two of silence and nothing happening, I walked over to the box and picked up the Polaroid that had come out of the camera. I started shaking it as much as I could, eager to see the results. When the photo finally showed up, I stopped. The angle in the photo wasn't even where the camera was. It was behind me. I turned around quickly, not very excited to see what was behind me. Nothing was. There was nobody in sight, and not a single thing changed from when I last looked over there. Click, the sound came from the box again, signaling that the camera went off. I gulped and walked over there, picking up the Polaroid picture again and waiting for it to develop. This time it was right in front of me, maybe just a few feet away. I saw myself just looking at the back from where the angle of the first photo came from. I looked at the photo a bit more before realizing that there was something there, and I was looking right at it. From where the first photo came from was a black figure looking at me smiling. I didn't waste a single second and just ran, dropping everything in my hands and running out of the attic. Once I got out of the attic, I hurried up and closed it shut and sighed a sigh of relief. I turned around to quickly exit the house and just wait outside for my brother, but right at the beginning of the stairs was a Polaroid picture. I walked over to it carefully and picked it up. On the back of the picture, it said in some red crayon, "Behind you." The handwriting looked like it belonged to a child. I didn't even bother to look behind me, but when I saw the picture itself, I wanted to scream. It showed me standing at the stairwell, but the same thing that had its hand on my grandma's head was right behind me. I was about to scream, but I couldn't. I couldn't even open my mouth. I felt the breath it took behind my back and how its hands were rubbing up and down my back. That was my last thought before I was presumably shoved down the stairs and passed out from head trauma. I woke up in the hospital a couple of days later. I tried to tell my brother and the hospital staff, but none of them listened and thought I was crazy. My brother even claimed there was no attic in Grandma's house and that I probably dreamed of it. To this day, I remember everything that happened that night, and I will probably never forget. I don't even know how to start this, or what to think. For context, me and my best friend Sarah have been best friends for around 3 years. We met on an online chat site, and we kind of just clicked after that. 2 weeks ago, Sarah texted me saying that she met a guy on Reddit named Sam. She said that they had the same interests, dislikes, and hobbies. I was happy for her. She had always complained about how she struggled to make friends, even online. I was her only friend, so I saw this as something very beneficial for her, and an opportunity for her to socialize with him and express herself. In the days that followed, I and Sarah continued texting each other normally. However, each time she would always bring up Sam in the middle of our conversation. I grew tired of her constant "Sam is so fun to speak to" or "Sam is so cool," and for the first time, I genuinely reconsidered our friendship. We ended up not texting each other for a day, which was uncommon. I guess she was too occupied with Sam's texts. The next day, which was a week ago, Sarah texted me saying that I should consider becoming Sam's friend because of how fascinating he was. She gave me his username to start a chat with him. I decided to start a short conversation with him, because of how eager Sarah was for me and him to become friends. As I was texting him, I felt something very off about him. He somehow knew a lot about me. He asked me extremely specific questions. One of the questions asked was, "Do you normally fall asleep around 12:15 a.m.?" When I answered yes to these unusual questions, he replied saying he did the same thing and that me and him would get along. I didn't reply to his message. There was no way I was going to continue speaking to this creep. I told Sarah about this and she said we were the best duo. I just wanted her to be serious for once. How had this Sam guy manipulated her to think these questions were normal? I got pretty mad at her and that was the first argument we had ever had. I did say quite hurtful things to her and we haven't texted each other since. I tried to forget about the whole situation, even though it was bothering me. That was until yesterday when Sam sent me a message saying "see you tonight." I thought he meant to message some random girl, so I just ignored the message. I was extremely exhausted since I had a long shift at work, so I fell asleep on my side, facing the wall. If you read the title, you'd know I suffer from sleep paralysis, so I normally sleep on my side to try and prevent it, though I still end up experiencing it. However, I hadn't experienced it since the time Sarah had told me about becoming friends with Sam, so I wasn't expecting anything to happen that night. Unfortunately, I woke up in the middle of the night, somehow lying on my back, paralyzed. I watched as the monster appeared on the bed, its blurry figure slowly getting closer to my motionless body. When it was a few inches near my face, I was able to move again, but for some reason, it didn't disappear like it normally did. I got up from my bed and slowly walked to the door, but it grabbed my neck before I could even touch the doorknob. I felt its hands tighten around my neck, its nails stabbing into my neck like swords. I tried to scream, but my vocal cords were trapped in its grip. After what felt like an eternity, it finally released me from its grip and I passed out. Today I woke up, disoriented and had a horrible pain in my neck. I walked into the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and almost screamed. There were nasty scars on my neck from when it attempted to strangle me. I've been trying to search for anything that explains what I have experienced. It just doesn't make any sense. Is what I've been suffering from for the past 4 years sleep paralysis, or something else? I'm starting to consider the possibility that Sam is the demon, but I'm not sure. Maybe it was just a coincidence that he had sent that message. I don't even know what to say to Sarah, and I know she won't even believe me if I tell her what I've experienced. I have been a park ranger for many years and I love the forest because it is diverse. In Elysian Grove, the trees stretch their branches across the sky and the ground is covered with an intricate weave of grasses, shrubs, flowers, and mosses. Every time I walk into the forest and catch sight of a new vista, I feel as if I am discovering something brand new. The hawk glides past me and I watch his every move. Then, I realize that he is hunting, searching for prey to bring home to his family. If a fire spreads through the forest and destroys everything in its path, a vast portion of our natural history will be lost forever. Several weeks ago, however, something peculiar occurred to me that I just have to share with you. I was on my usual patrolling in the forest. The towering trees and a canopy of leaves were so thick they blocked out all the light. The ground was covered in a soft blanket of moss, lichen, and ivy with interweaving roots and fallen logs forming intriguing pathways. The air was thick with the fragrant scent of pine needles and wildflowers, and the sound of birdsong fills the air. A deep silence pervaded the forest, broken only by the rustling of leaves, the gentle ripple of stream water, and the croaks and calls of various wildlife creatures. Every now and again, I could hear distant thunder rumbling in the distance, or a twig snapping underfoot. Everywhere I looked, there was beauty and serenity. As I ventured further into the woodlands by my quad, I noticed smoke curling up in the sky. My mind leaped with worry that a forest fire had broken out. With caution, I inched closer to the aroma of smoke and hid in the dense foliage. To my surprise, I spotted an entire village that was concealed from view until now. I couldn't believe there were people living in this remote area of the forest. A small, peculiar village was tucked away in the depths of the forest. The buildings were made of logs and stones as if they had been grown from the ground itself. The village was surrounded by tall trees, obscuring it from view. The people there moved slowly and cautiously, as though they were wary of being seen. A thin plume of smoke rose up into the air, indicating that a fire had been lit in the center of the village. A feeling of mystery filled the air around the village and made me want to explore further. As I made my way through the bushes, the village seemed to have been untouched by the modern world. To my surprise, I was greeted by a group of friendly villagers who welcomed me with open arms. "Hello there. I'm Emma, a park ranger. It's nice to meet you all," I said. The villagers smiled and welcomed me to their humble abode. "We are honored to have you here, Emma. Please come with us. We'll make you some tea," said one of the villagers. I followed them into a cozy house, where I noticed a peculiar tradition. The villagers always walked backward when entering or exiting a building. "I couldn't help but notice that you all walk backward when entering or exiting a building. Is there a reason for this?" I asked, curious. The villagers exchanged a look and then one of them spoke up. "Yes, it is a tradition that has been passed down for generations. We believe that walking backward brings us good luck and keeps evil spirits away." I nodded in understanding and took a seat at the table, where they served me a cup of tea made from herbs found in the forest. As I sipped on the warm beverage, I struck up a conversation with the villagers. "I must say, I'm quite amazed by this place. How long have you all been living here?" I asked. "Many generations. We've always lived here and never contacted anybody else," replied one of the villagers. I was taken aback by this statement. It was hard to believe that such a remote village had managed to survive without any contact with the outside world, not to mention that I had been working as a park ranger, but I had never come across their village and I should have known about it. "That's quite impressive. How do you manage to sustain yourselves?" I asked. "We have our own land and we cultivate it for our needs. We also gather food from the forest and the nearby river," replied another villager. As we continued to chat and drink tea, I felt a sense of peace and tranquility in the village. It was a stark contrast from the hustle and bustle of the city. As we conversed, I pulled out my pocket-sized vanity mirror to check my lip color. Before I could lift it up to my face, I saw the uneasiness in the room, followed by a few stares when they realized what it was. Even in the dim light of the room, I could tell the residents wanted me to keep it away. It was very odd, and I couldn't help but ask, "Excuse me, is there something wrong with my mirror?" The residents looked at each other nervously, and then one of them spoke up. "We don't like mirrors in this house. They give us bad luck and attract negative energy." I was taken aback by their response, but I tried to hide my surprise and asked, "Really? I've never heard of that before. Could you tell me more about it?" The residents hesitated for a moment, but then they opened up and shared their beliefs with me. "In our culture, mirrors are believed to be a portal to another world, and they can attract spirits and ghosts. We avoid them as much as possible." I nodded slowly, trying to be respectful of their beliefs, but I couldn't help but wonder why they were so afraid of mirrors. I decided to change the subject and ask them about their hobbies and interests. As we talked, I couldn't help but glance at my mirror every now and then, but the residents kept their distance from it. It was as if they were afraid to touch it or even look at it. I nodded in agreement and left, still feeling puzzled by their beliefs about mirrors. It was a strange experience, but it was also interesting to learn about a different culture's beliefs and customs. After a few minutes, I accepted their offer to explore the tiny village. As I stepped out of the house, I immediately noticed something strange. None of the people in the community had shadows. Even stranger was that their footsteps made no sound against the pavement. I froze in place and watched them in amazement as they moved silently through the streets. One of the inhabitants noticed my confusion and approached me. "Is everything okay?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words. I couldn't help but notice that you and your community members don't seem to have any shadows," I finally said, hoping for a logical explanation. The inhabitant shrugged. "It's just the way we are. We've always been this way, for as long as we can remember." I was getting frustrated with his vague answers. "But how is that even possible?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The inhabitant looked at me calmly. "We don't know. It's just a part of our community's history and culture." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like something out of a horror movie. I have to go," I stuttered, feeling uneasy. As I walked away, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that lingered within me. I had never experienced anything like this before. The more I thought about it, the more scared I became. It was as if I had stumbled upon a community of ghosts. I decided to do some research on this community when I got home, but at that moment I noticed that one of the inhabitants was watching me intently. He approached me and introduced himself as Jackson. "I heard you were interested in learning more about our culture," he said with a friendly smile. "If you'd like, I could take you deeper into the village and show you around." I hesitated for a moment before agreeing. Jackson seemed nice enough, and I was curious to learn. He led me through the narrow streets, pointing out various landmarks and explaining their significance. We eventually stopped in front of a large building, and he explained that it was a temple dedicated to the gods of their community. It was a stunning sight. The temple was made of white stone and had intricate carvings all over its facade. The windows were stained glass, depicting scenes from ancient mythology. We stepped inside the temple, and I couldn't help but feel awed by its beauty. Everywhere I looked, there were statues and sculptures that seemed to come alive with each movement of light. The walls were decorated with colorful tapestries and paintings that depicted stories from long ago. As Jackson and I were leaving the temple, I suddenly heard the sound of bells ringing in the distance. I turned to Jackson, puzzled. "What's that sound?" I asked. Jackson smiled at me. "That's the sound of the bells signaling the start of the silent hour," he explained. "For the next hour, nobody in the village is allowed to speak or make any noise. It's believed to help us attune to the forest's energy." I was taken aback by his explanation. "Wait, what? Nobody speaks for an hour?" I asked, incredulous. Jackson nodded. "Yes, it's a tradition that we've had for many years. It helps us connect with nature and find inner peace." I couldn't help but feel skeptical about the idea. "But how do you communicate with each other during that time? What if there's an emergency?" Jackson chuckled. "We have our own ways of communicating without speaking. We use hand gestures and facial expressions, and if there's an emergency, we break the silence." As we walked through the village, I noticed that everyone was observing the silent hour. It was eerily quiet, with no sound except for the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirping of birds. I tried to keep quiet, but it was difficult for me. I was used to talking and making noise, and the silence was making me feel restless. I couldn't help but feel like I was being punished for something. But as the hour went on, I began to appreciate the stillness and quietness of the village. It was like a peaceful oasis in the midst of a chaotic world. And when the hour was over and the villagers started to talk again, I felt a sense of relief and gratitude. Although it was strange and unfamiliar to me, I accepted the tradition and learned to appreciate the beauty of silence. It was a humbling experience that taught me to slow down and appreciate the present moment. After the end of the silent hour, the village returned to its usual liveliness. People were talking and laughing, children were playing, and the sounds of music filled the air. I spent some more time exploring the village, admiring its beauty and talking to the locals. But as I spent more time with them, I began to notice something strange. The people in the village were somehow different from anyone I had ever met before. They spoke in a strange language that I couldn't understand, and their customs and beliefs were completely foreign to me. It was as if I had stepped into a different world, one that didn't seem real. The more I explored, the more I felt like I was in a dream. The village seemed too perfect, too beautiful, too serene. It was like a utopia, and it was almost too good to be true. The locals seemed too calm, too peaceful, almost like they were under some kind of spell. It was as if they had no worries, no problems, no conflicts. I tried to ignore my unease and enjoy the beauty of the village, but the more I looked around, the more I felt like I was in a surreal world. It was like a movie set, where everything was perfect and pristine, but it lacked the messiness and complexity of real life. As the day drew to a close, I realized that I needed to leave the village. It was too strange, too unreal, and I couldn't wait to go back home. As it was getting darker, I noticed that the eyes of the inhabitants seemed to glow subtly in the darkness. It was a strange sight, and it sent shivers down my spine. I turned to Jackson, who was standing next to me, and asked, "Why are your eyes glowing like that?" Jackson looked at me, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Our eyes have always been like this," he explained. "It's a part of our biology. We can see in the dark, which is why we don't need any lights in the village." I couldn't help but feel creeped out by his response. "You don't need any lights because your eyes glow?" I asked, trying to make sense of it all. Jackson nodded. "Yes, that's right. And we don't sleep either. We believe that sleep is a waste of time and that we can achieve more by staying awake all the time." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like I had stumbled upon a village of nocturnal creatures. "You never sleep?" I asked, feeling more scared than ever. Jackson smiled. "No, we don't. We spend our nights meditating and connecting with nature." I wanted to leave the village as soon as possible. I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that lingered within me. It was as if I had stumbled upon a community of creatures that were not human. "I have to go," I said, my voice shaking. "Thank you for showing me around." Jackson nodded in understanding. "Of course, it was nice to have you here. Come back anytime." I turned and walked away, feeling like I had escaped from a nightmare. The experience had been both fascinating and terrifying, and I couldn't wait to leave the village behind. I started running towards my quad, desperate to get away from the strange village. I felt like I was being watched, and I could feel the eyes of the villagers on my back as I ran. The darkness seemed to stretch before me, and the stars shone brightly in the night sky. The forest was dark and airy, with twisted trees that seemed to reach out for me. The only sound was the rumble of the quad's engine and the rustling of leaves in the wind. The night was quiet and still, with no signs of life around me. As I drove deeper into the forest, the darkness seemed to close in on me, making it difficult to see what lay ahead. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and my palms were sweating on the handles of the quad. It was as if the forest was alive and was watching me. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of getting out of the forest and back to civilization. I had never felt so alone and vulnerable, and I was desperate to get out of there as soon as possible. As I continued driving, the forest seemed to become even more surreal. The trees were twisted and gnarled, and the shadows seemed to move and shift in the darkness. It was like a nightmare come to life, and I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever make it out of there alive. But then, I saw a glimmer of light at the ranger station, and my heart leaped with hope. It was a sign of civilization, and I knew that I was getting closer to safety. With renewed energy, I drove towards the light, determined to make it back home. The forest may have been eerie and terrifying, but I was stronger than my fear, and I knew that I could make it out of there. As I arrived at the ranger station, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I could see my colleague, John, sitting at the front desk, typing away on his computer. When he looked up and saw me, his expression changed from one of surprise to concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, noticing the pale and terrified look on my face. I shook my head, feeling too scared to speak at first. Then I took a deep breath and told him about my experience in the strange village. John listened intently, nodding occasionally as I recounted my encounter with the villagers. As I finished my story, John's grandfather walked into the office. He was an old man, with a kind face and a gentle smile. He greeted me warmly and then listened to me as I repeated my story. When I was finished, the old man looked thoughtful. "I know the area you're talking about," he said slowly. "There used to be a village of Indians living there. They had a beautiful community with their own customs and beliefs." I felt a sense of unease creeping over me as he spoke. "What happened to them?" I asked, my voice shaking. The old man sighed. "They were hit by a natural disaster a long time ago. Their village was destroyed, and no survivors were ever found." I felt a chill run down my spine. The thought of encountering spirits and ghosts was too much for me to handle, but I have never had the courage to go back and find it out either.